Hey Oliver, this is a quick tutorial coming up on a couple weeks before KSP2 comes out, but it's all about rendezvousing in orbit and so you can dock and exchange astronauts or fuel. So that's our orbital space station. It's in the teal, its orbital trajectory is the teal circle there. It's in a circular orbit directly on the equator of the moon. Okay, and this looks like, oh my gosh, this is a huge mess. Okay, so this is one of our communication satellites. Its orbit is way out here, and we're not going to bother with that. And this is a second communication satellite, and it's a polar orbit, and it is way out here outside of our little operating area in here. So we're not going to worry about that, okay? That's just to help us. So what we've got here is we've got our return spacecraft, which is Apollo, the regular Apollo capsule. It's a 3-person spaceship, and the function is to return to Earth and parachute down to a soft landing and return the astronauts home. And then this is the space station that we're in right now. And then this is the lunar lander, and we're going to presuppose that this just took off from the moon and it has to rendezvous with the space station to bring its astronauts back there. And first thing we say is, holy cow, it's in a really weird orbit. How do we do this? How do we get it to the space station? So let's go ahead and talk about that. So let's go ahead and switch to it. We're going to switch to the lunar lander. There it is, our little 2-person ship. It's got a pilot and an engineer. We've got our little docking port and our RCS thrusters. And that's going to help us steer and maneuver back. So the first thing we have to do, okay, we've got 1,000 meters per second of fuel. So now what we have to do is our inclinations for our orbit are off. So we're going to set our destination to the station. And we're going to notice that when we pan the screen very specifically to look at the space station orbital plane, which is in yellow, we can see that our lunar lander is going to cross that orbital plane twice per orbit. Once on this side of the moon and once on this side of the moon. So knowing that, we can see where the lines intersect. This is where the orbital paths cross. So this is where we're going to create our maneuver. And the idea is that we want to adjust the maneuver of our lunar lander so that it matches the inclination plane of the lunar station. So first thing we need to do is make sure we know which way our spacecraft are going. Our spacecraft are orbiting in this direction and this direction. We always want to be orbiting in the same direction, otherwise we're going to be passing each other at a very high velocity. Next thing we need to do is we need to change this orbital inclination to match the moon. So since we're orbiting this way, this is going to be our first intersecting node that we can use. So we're going to put a maneuver node there, and we're going to see how are we going to do this exactly. So the way we do this is we align the planes so that they're a line, not a circle, right? So we're looking at both of them at the exact same angle, and we have to use the vertical up so that we can bring this orbital plane up since we're going in this direction, and that will bring the other end down. One of the things that happens though when you do that is it adds velocity to your prograde. So we need to counteract that with our retrograde. And then we continue to do it until our orbital planes line up exactly. Oh, we went a little bit too far. And there we go. So now we've got this huge elliptical problem. So what we do know is that in this location we want to be facing to the normal or to the up position. So we can do this without a maneuver node. So we're going to go ahead and cancel the maneuver node. Sometimes it's hard when there's a lot of other objects around to isolate that. Okay, so let's just go ahead and hit our normal, and we're going to fly to this location. When we get to this location, we're going to conduct a burn. We're not going to be in this location long because we're moving quite fast. We're moving 535 meters a second. So we're going to get there. I'm going to cut off the time warp, and then I'm going to go ahead and initiate a burn. I'm going to use half throttle, and you can see what's happening here. It's adjusting our orbital inclination. But we're moving past that node, which is going to start messing with it. It's going to put us off a different inclination in a different way. So we're going to go ahead and cancel that burn. And now we're past where our burn node is. Let's go to the opposite side. So if we go to the opposite side, if we're facing up here, we have to face down when we're in this location. So we're going to switch to anti-normal. And this time we're going to burn with full throttle and see what happens. We're going to adjust our screen so that the orbital planes turn into lines. And we are going to fly to right where they intersect. And this time I'm going to hit full throttle. And we've passed the place of good burn. So now we're going to fly back over to this side, and we're going to face up again. So this spacecraft doesn't have a lot of delta V, so we might have to do this a few times. If you have a spacecraft that's got a really strong engine, it will adjust this inclination very quickly. The reason I wanted to have strong or a weak engine is so that we'd have to do this repeatedly so you can kind of understand the idea of what we're doing. Or we can go all the way around, keep the same attitude facing up, and every time we get to the same node, we can burn our engine, slowly changing our inclination. You can see it consumes a lot of fuel to do this. But we will have enough fuel to make it to the space station, so don't you worry. So we're going to fly around again. We're going to start a little bit before it and burn through it. You can see we're getting closer and closer to getting the same orbital inclination or plane. And once we get close, we want to burn a little bit more gently. We don't want to go full throttle. So I'm going to hit X, and then I'm going to hit Shift, and then we want to watch this line go 90 degrees and that line go 90 degrees, and then we're going to cut off our engine. And then we're in the exact perfect inclination, matched exactly with the space station. So there we are. So now our orbital planes are exact. The next step is we're in much lower orbit. So you can see at a lower orbit, our velocity is fast, 535 meters a second. And if we switch to our orbital station, you'll see that we're at a higher orbit, and we're going to set target for the lunar so that we can set its target. You can see that we're much higher orbit up here, so we're going to be going slower. The further you are away from a gravitational body, the slower you need to be going to orbit it. So here we are. We've got two different orbits. We're going to remain at the same orbit with the moon station throughout this whole tutorial here. And we're going to switch back to the lunar lander. So now what we have to do, since we're at a lower orbit, we're going to fast forward time until we get close, until we get about 2 clock positions behind it. And as we orbit, see how we're catching up? I'll actually do an extra orbit so you can see that we're going around much faster. We're not only going faster, but we have less of a distance to travel. So let's get to where we're catching up. So right there, we've got, if we position the moon in the center, 12 o'clock being here, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock. So now the space station is roughly at 3 o'clock, and we are at, well, here's 6 o'clock, so we're right at 4:30. So we're going to create a maneuver node and see what it does for us. So we're behind it. So it looks like it's going to line us up quite well. So if we move this closer to our ship, we grab the circle, we grab the circle portion. You'll see the circle, see how the normal highlights when you're on it? You got to be careful. You got to get it so the circle highlights, and you left click and hold, and you can drag it back and forth, and you can, what you want to do is you want to line up the orange with the orange and the magenta with the magenta. And so it looks like, okay, if at this location we burn 37.4 meters a second, if we increase our velocity by burning prograde, we will then intercept the space station in this location on the opposite side. Remember, every time we burn on one side, it affects our orbit on the other side. It doesn't really affect our orbit here. So it's going to put us in close proximity at very close speed, 38 meters a second of difference between both space vehicles. So what I'm going to do now is click the maneuver node, and that's going to orient our ship to the position, to the direction it has to be facing for its burn when it gets to this location. And we're going to zoom in here, and so it's a 4-second burn. So I'm going to burn at half throttle for 8 seconds. So this burn time is telling us it's 4 seconds if we burn at full throttle. So if we burn at half throttle, we have to double our burn time to get the same effect. So I'm going to start the burn at half throttle at 4 seconds, and it's going to be an 8-second burn. And it will burn through the node, and then it will burn up to 4 seconds on the other side of the node. If we're going to burn at full throttle, we would start at 2 seconds and burn from 2 to 2. So I have my finger on the shift key. When we hit 4, I'm going to throttle up to half throttle. And you can see that we're burning prograde. We're burning in this direction, and it's raising our apoapsis on this direction. Then I'm going to hit the shift key. We're 0.5 off. So I'm going to add a little bit of power very carefully with the shift and X key until I get really close. And I'm going to now get rid of the maneuver node, and we can see what our trajectory is. Okay, so we're going to be at a separation of 1.3 kilometers with a relative speed of 38.7 or 37.8 meters per second when we arrive at this location. We're going to be very close to the space station, and we're going to be going relatively slow. So this next thing we have to do is we have to left click on our orbital right here anywhere in this box. You've got 3 options. You've got orbit, which is orbiting the moon. You've got surface. It's you want to switch to this one when you're going to land on the moon. And then you've got your target, which our target, we've made the station our target by clicking on it and setting it as target. So we want our speed and our navigation ball to be relative to our target when we get into proximity. So we're going to set that now. And we're going to fast forward time, and you can see that as we catch up, we're going higher, so you can see we're slowing down. And I'm going to turn off the fast forward right about here. We're going to zoom in. You can see that we're a little bit ahead of it. And when we get to this location, we're going to be a little bit ahead of it. So we're going to switch to our map screen. And we're going to hit the retrograde button so that we are facing away from the target. We're facing away from the target. We're actually facing away from the direction the target is moving. So the target is moving in the same direction we're pointing. It's here and it's going to move in this direction. So we want to face that same direction and burn because it's going faster than us. So we want to slow down relative to the target, but not yet. We want to wait till it gets closer. So we're going to speed up time. We're going to wait till it gets closer. Okay. We want it to get as close as possible. You can see it's still getting closer. It's way above us. We have to burn up eventually. But right now what we're going to do is let it get as close as it's going to get. Other than if we don't burn, it's going to keep on passing us by. So now we're going to turn on the throttle with our shift key. And we're going to bring our target speed to 0 meters a second, or as close to 0 as we can get. You can see that it's slowing down relative to us. Now we're to gently finish our burn. I want to bring it down to 0. We kill our engine. So now we are moving at 0 meters a second relative to each other. We're absolutely stationary relative to each other, but we're still in an orbit. If we switch to our orbit, we're still moving 458 meters per second around the moon. So we're going to go ahead and click this twice to get back to target. Now I'm going to hit the target. This is point at the target and point away from the target. So we're going to point at the target. And now we've got 700 meters to cross to get there. So we're going to speed up to about, let's go about 8 meters a second. Okay, so now we're closing in on it at 8 meters a second, but we don't want to hit it. So now we're going to turn around and face away from the target so that once we get close, we can then turn on our throttle and then slow back down to 0 meters a second relative to the target. And if we switch to the map screen, you can see that our orbits are very close. We've got the teal line and the yellow line representing the space station orbit and our orbit very close together. And we're just going to wait patiently. We can speed up time. So we want to be, actually we want to hit retrograde burn because you can see our retrograde position relative to the target has changed. So now we're going to gently throttle up. We're going to slow down our approach. We can keep approaching it. But as we get closer and closer, we want to be moving slower and slower. So now we're going to slow down a little bit more. Now let's slow to a stop because we're on a collision course. Okay, so now we're not moving relative to each other. We're still in orbit though. So this is the smaller ship with a smaller docking port. This is the medium-sized docking port. And this is the small docking port. So we want to line up with that. There's two ways we can do this. We can either fly over here and dock, or we can hit the right the right bracket key on our keyboard and switch. When we're in close proximity to vehicles, we can switch back and forth with our bracket key. So we're going to switch to this spaceship, and we're going to hit the Q or the E buttons for roll, and we're going to face this docking port towards our lunar lander. We want to face it in the same direction. It makes it easier so we don't have to fly all around. Okay, so now this is going to be our static position with the space station, so we're going to hit our bracket key again. And now we want to face up relative to the target. We're going to switch to RCS, and we're going to hit the H key and thrust upwards. So the H key thrusts in the direction you're facing, and the N key thrusts the opposite direction, you see. So that we're using our monopropellant. You can see how much we have there. So we're going to, as we get up level, we want to push N to slow down our relative speed. There's our relative speed. Now we're at 0. Now, right now our target's set for that, for the command capsule, which is the default setting for the game. So what we want to do is we want to click on the crew hatch or the docking node and set as target. See how it switched it to this. So now when we face that docking target, we are still below it, but now we're facing it. So now we are, with this button, we are facing our target, and the magenta bullseye is our target. And our ship is facing the target, but this represents the direction we're traveling. So we're actually traveling in this direction, which it could be confusing sometime on the nav ball, but if you just pay attention to the nav ball, you can use your RCS. So use the I key gently to bring it down. I and K. This is I, this is K. And then you use the J key to bring it over very gently, because a tiny keystroke moves it a lot. And now we're lined up, so we're going to thrust forward about 5 meters a second. So what you want to do is line up our prograde marker dead center on our magenta target marker. And we do that with the I, J, K, L keys. And then when we get close, we're just going to slow ourselves down just a touch with the N key, which is going to thrust us reverse. There we go. See how it's slowing us down relative to the target. And the slower you're going, the more this yellow prograde marker will move when you hit the I, J, K, L keys. But we're pretty... Oh, see how much it moves when you're going slow? But we're pretty lined up. So boom, we've got a hard dock. So now we are docked with the space station. So now we're all one ship. So now these astronauts want to go home. So let's go ahead and hit the map key. And this is our return vehicle, so let's switch to it. And we've got our pilot Valentina. And we are also in orbit around the moon, but we want to rendezvous with the space station to pick up those Kerbal knots so we can go home and land safely. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at it. We're going to, oh my gosh, there's so much going on here. What do I do next? Now, we are going to ignore these satellites here, and we're going to just focus on the ship we're flying and the space station that we want to go to. So we're going to set it as target, and once again, see, where our orbital planes are different from one another. So we are traveling in this direction, and the space station is also traveling in this direction, but our inclinations are off. You can see that our orbit is like this with our return vehicle, and the space station's orbit is perfectly equatorial with the moon. So we need to match these again, right? So you remember that we cross the plane twice per orbit. So since we're traveling in this direction, and this plane is above that plane, you can see there's a big angle there. We want to reduce this angle to nothing so they're both this way. So since we're traveling this way and this is up, we want to face down, and we want to burn in this direction so that this will come down to match that plane. So we're going to fast forward a little bit. Oh, we got to turn on the engine. We hit the space bar. Now our engine is activated. So now when we get there, we're going to fast forward to that location. Since we're way out here, we're orbiting a lot slower than we were with the other ship because we're closer to the moon. So it's not going to take as much delta V to adjust. So now we're going to line up our planes, and I'm going to throttle up the engine, and you can see that it happens a lot quicker when you're traveling in a more slow orbit. just hit the shift key to just really dial it in. And so this is moving. You want it to go to about 90 degrees. So initially it was right here. These dotted lines were right here and right here. But when you switch them to 90 degrees from where they were, that means you're completely parallel. And each orbital plane is exactly lined up. So now that we've done that, all we have to do is take this orbit and reduce it in size to get to this orbit, but at the same time, we want to line up with this ship. So let's do a couple orbits and see how quickly the station orbits relative to us. It is much lower, so it's traveling much faster, and it is traveling less distance. So every time we orbit, it's going to do 2 or 3 orbits around the moon. So for us to reduce our orbit, we need to burn retrograde. Doesn't matter where we are, we can burn retrograde. So let's go ahead and turn around and burn retrograde a little bit and lower the size of our orbit. We're not going to worry where we end up just yet because these 2 orbits are very different in size. So we want to get these 2 orbits a little bit closer before we start worrying about our rendezvous. So we're going to face retrograde. You can see we're traveling in this direction. So we're going to turn on our engine. And if we burn retrograde, we're going to lower our orbit on the opposite side of the body that we're orbiting, which in this case is the moon. And so let's get it down to about this area here, so that we're much closer together. Now you can actually lower it to the same level as the station is on. That's another technique, but we'll cover that later. For now, let's just get it right there. So now we need to recircularize our orbit. So we're going to fly around to this location. You can see as we get closer, we speed up. So now our ship is automatically going to go to the retrograde position, and we're going to conduct a burn to lower our apoapsis. So now we've recircularized at a much closer orbit to our target orbit. So since we want to get to this ship now, since we're on the outside of it instead of the inside of it like the lunar lander, this space station needs to be back here so that as we both get to the other side, we are at the same point. So we're going to have to speed up time and have this come around behind us. Let's go right about there. Okay, so if we put this at 6 o'clock, we're at 6 o'clock. There's that being 12, 3, 6, 9 o'clock. This is about 8 o'clock area. So we're going to set our maneuver node up here somewhere. And since we have to reduce the altitude of our orbit to match the lower altitude orbit of the space station, we're going to burn retrograde again to reduce our orbit on the opposite side. And you can see, okay, we're pretty close, but we're not exactly right. So rather than adjust the amount that we're going to burn, let's move the location where we're going to burn. You see what happens by moving it? We can line these up. So that puts us at 2.4 kilometers apart in separation and a relative speed of 30 meters per second. So there we go. That's where we're going to conduct our burn, is in this location. We're going to hit our maneuver node to align to the direction we're going to burn. Once we get to that location, we'll speed up time here. It's a 0.9 second burn, so we're not going to do any math here. We're just going to turn the throttle on very low. So we're just going to use the shift key to move the throttle up about there. So we passed it a little bit, but that's not a big deal. So we're going to go ahead. We're lined up with our direction we have to be in, and I'm going to hit the shift key. And I'm going to get ready to hit the X key when we're about done with our burn. And see, we're off a little bit, so I'm just going to barely hit the shift key and then hit the X key again. There, we're at 0. It doesn't have to be perfect. You can be, even if we're 0.5 In fact, I'm going to burn past it a little bit to 0.5 meters a second. Oh, so we're past it now. Not a big deal. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to get rid of this maneuver node. You can see, okay, so we're a little, when we arrive, we're going to be a little bit further away because we didn't burn so precise, but it's not a big deal. It only added about a half a kilometer in distance. So let's go ahead and fast forward, and we're going to click twice to get our target, and we're going to face retrograde. Whenever you're going to rendezvous, you want to make sure you're on target and facing retrograde every time. Okay, we want to stop our time fast forward a little bit ahead of time so that we have time to think. So where is our ship? Probably too far. Oh, there it is. It's up against the moon. And so relative to each other, you see we're facing the same direction that it's moving. So as we speed up time, you can see it get closer and closer. So we're going to stop about here. Not everything you do has to be precise, and we're going to burn. So we need to zero out our speed once again. So I'm going to use the shift key to do a gentle burn. And you know what? It never has to be perfect. I don't want you to get the idea that you have to fight with getting it exactly at zero. It's not a big deal. So now we're going to face our target. And we're 2 kilometers away, so I'm going to speed us up to about 20 meters a second, pointed directly at our target. So now we're closing our distance. So now we're going to turn around retrograde from our target. Actually, to zero our speed, we always want to be retrograde to ourselves. So I'm going to speed up time a little bit. Well, actually, first we're going to go to the map. So you can see our 2 orbits aren't perfect, but our inclination is perfect. We are very close to each other in inclination. We're just not traveling at the same speed here. So now I'm going to speed up time. So now I'm going to apply our throttle a little bit. Well, I'm going to wait a little bit longer. Since we're not actually going to hit it, we're going to fly right by. And once it gets a little bit closer, I'm going to use the shift key to give it just a little bit of throttle. And we want to slow that down. We want to slow our approach. We can see that we're in no danger of colliding with it. And we just want to bring it in fairly close. So let's kill our speed relative to our target now. Okay, so now we're going to open our docking port, and we see that that docking port is taken. This docking port is the one we have to go to. So we're going to right click on it and set it as target. So we can either fly around, or we can use our bracket key to reorient this ship. So the last time I reoriented the ship. So this time we're going to fly around. So the way we do this is with we're going to change the direction we're facing now. Instead of using these buttons, we're going to use the ASWD key. So I'm going to use, first I'm going to see which way is down. So that's down. So I'm going to roll us so that the hatch of the ship is on top. So when I use the A key or the D key, it's going to turn us. So we want to go about this direction. We want to fly out here so we're even with it, and then we want to turn 90 degrees and fly straight at it. So now I'm going to use the RCS is on, so I'm going to use the H key to thrust forward. You can see that the gas comes out the back, which means we're thrusting forward. So we thrust it up to about 1.8 meters a second. And we're just going to coast now. We want to get out so that we're lined up with this. So as we get closer, we're going to reorient our screen. And then once we get to where we want to be, we're just going to, actually want to be facing the direction, so we want to be on there. We're going to use the N key to reverse our thrust. which is going to bring us back to a stop. And it doesn't have to be perfect. There we go, we're at 0. So now we're going to face the target. Whoop, and when you use the keys, it will rotate you. So we're going to use the Q key to rotate so the hatch is back up, which happens to make us parallel with the line right here. So we can see we're a little bit above it. So let's thrust down with the I key, and that will bring this up to the line. And that means we're perfectly parallel with it. Now we're going to use that until we get right about there. Now we're going to hit the J key, because we're drifting. Now we're drifting the other way, so now we're going to thrust forward just a little bit. There we go. So now we're actually lined up directly on it. You can see if I use the L key and the J key, it'll drift us back and forth. And then if I use the I key and the K key, it's going to drift us up and down. So we're going to thrust to about 5 meters a second, and we're going to make sure that we're set to line up with the target, so the magenta circle, and then we want our prograde marker. See, if we hit down, we're going to keep coasting down and we're never going to be able to dock, so we want our prograde marker to be on it. And that's what we do. We just use our keys to keep our prograde marker centered on this target. Very simple concept, and we're moving very slowly relative to the space station. And as you're orbiting in a circle, so this is always going to drift off. So we always have to do minor corrections to get it back centered. You can see we're very slowly closing the distance. You can once you get good at it, you can speed up to like 1 meter or 2 meters a second and conduct this whole process a little bit faster of a pace. But in the beginning, just be gentle and be patient, and as you do it, every time you do it, you're going to get better. You can see we're lined up with it. We're lined up in this plane, and we're lined up in this plane. So this isn't completely lined up, so we're just going to adjust it with our RCS thrusters. Oh, I accidentally hit the spacebar key. Lucky for us that we're lined up. So now we have no way to get home. Oh well, the video will have to end shortly. Be careful you don't hit the spacebar key. So now we're going to have to send a rescue mission out, but for all of our purposes here, I'm just going to end the video, and we're not going to have a sequel to this. This is just about changing our inclination and docking. So in the future, don't pull an Uncle Steve and hit the spacebar in accident, because now we're stranded at the space station. We have no engine on this vehicle anymore to get it back to Earth. So now it's just going to become a habitation module. All right, so I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you practice a little bit, because KSP2 is coming out soon, about 2 weeks away, a little bit less than 2 weeks. So talk to you later, buddy.